All right. We are streaming. A little bright in here. That's a little better. All right. It's 8 p.m. Good evening, all. It's 8 p.m. and time for the OMARC Science and Technology Net on Sunday night. I am Neil, W2NDG, coming to you live from Highland, New York, on the repeater of the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club on 146.805 megahertz with a negative shift and a PL tone of 103.5 hertz. We are also streaming on YouTube, and to find us, you just search for W2NDG Science and Technology on YouTube. And we have a live stream going right now. Let me try. And good evening to the repeater. Well, first let's drop and see if there's any emergency or priority traffic. Okay, nothing heard. And it's always a good chance for me to grab something to write on. Well, welcome again to the Overlook Mountain Sunday night, 8 o'clock Science and Technology Net, brought to you by the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club. We gather here on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. to discuss science and technology, not always ham radio related, but always of interest to people who like to tinker and are interested in things of a technological basis. It's obviously been a busy weekend for everybody. Hope everybody had a Merry Christmas. We're going to keep things really short tonight. The original idea of what we were going to do tonight was because I think someone was planning on having a New Year's Day mobile direction finding hunt or hidden transmitter hunt. RDF, there's a lot of different ways to say it, but we had thought because we haven't done a lot of mobile ones that I would speak on the subject because I have quite a bit of experience with finding transmitters without using sophisticated equipment, at least in the VHF range. Let me drop. I don't know if we're still doing that hunt or not, but I thought we would do this anyway. And like I said, I think we're going to keep it short tonight. I know a lot of us are exhausted, those of us that had guests for the weekend or had to cook. But like I said, we'll keep it short. Anyway, I am usually accompanied when we do these nets by my sidekick and partner in crime, Jim K2BHM. Jim, are you around tonight?
Let me check in the mirror and make sure. Yep, I'm here. K2BHM.
Well, thanks, Jim. And, we can go off on tangents tonight because I don't know, how deep we'll get into this. I'll keep everybody posted as far as future nets. I might have some scheduling complications coming up, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, all right. Thanks for checking in, Jim. We'll take check-ins in a little bit. Wanted to discuss where this experience came from. And first of all, Jim, do you have much transmitter finding experience? I know you've been on a couple of the ones we did.
Not really. I just went with my camera to take pictures and never really got into it.
Did you ever do any HF hunting years ago or even 11-meter hunting?
Closest I came to that was doing some repair work on the VOR Omni for the Waterloo Arsenal Flying Cub airplane.
All right. Well, I will put you into the mix with everyone else tonight. My first exposure to this was probably as a kid. A lot of us remember the CB craze of the 70s. And in the early 70s, I was not even a teenager yet. My brothers had discovered CB radio. And there were a couple of times when I would kind of hang out, when we'd all be in, I think it was Paul who had the CB back then, and we'd all be hanging out in his car with the doors open in the driveway and some lawn chairs out there, and talking to anybody who was on. And every now and then someone would come on that they wanted to find. And we'd jump in the car and they would try to see if they could figure out where they were. I don't think we ever successfully found anybody. But years later, when I got my ham license, one of the people I made friends with early on became my Elmer, man named Andy. And Andy is WA2CDL. He has been fixing radios and building radios for a very long time, and he does it for a living. He's an RF engineer. And he immediately, after, kind of taking me under his wing and teaching me quite a bit, invited me to join up with a whole group of them that did transmitter hunting. And they're very basic format transmitter hunts. Let me drop. These are 2-meter transmitter hunts, almost always, so they started mixing it up a little bit. And it's usually the same process every time. They have somebody hide a transmitter, usually Andy's own automated 2-meter transmitter, and he gives, whoever hides it gives a radius from a center point or boundaries. And usually you're talking about a circle or a square that's about 5 miles across, sometimes a little more. Sometimes they'll give a radius of 5 miles, which would be a circle 10 miles across. But either way, you get a starting point and a radius. As the person hiding the transmitter learns, you don't hide the transmitter at the center of the radius, but you try to figure out, and it's a good idea to test your transmitter to make sure that the coverage area that you give, that at least at the center point, you can hear the transmitter from where you're intending to find it or hide it. A number of hunts over the years we've done where we started out and we couldn't hear it at all. But then sometimes someone has to say, give you a little hint and say, well, drive east from here and you should start to hear it. But anyway, that's usually how it's done. And then people drive around and try to find the transmitter. You don't reveal where it is when you find it because somebody else may still be waiting to come in. And when all is said and done and all of the hunters have found the transmitter, usually the group goes and gets dinner or pie and coffee, depending on how late it is, at a diner. And it's a lot of fun. It was usually Friday night hunts. We did a couple of day hunts on the weekend. And I got involved with it pretty early on in my ham radio career, which is about 10 years ago. I didn't have a whole lot of cash at the time. I had a decent mobile rig when we first started doing this. I had bought my first Icom Ict 207, and we used to hunt after the first few with a Kenwood all-mode 2-meter that my brother had picked up at a garage sale for, I think, $5 or $10, some crazy deal like that. But that was it, and just like a mag mount whip antenna, and a lot of tricks. And in our group, our transmitter hunting group down in Long Island, there were a number of people who had Doppler systems, and I'll get into what a Doppler is and the basics of what it does in a moment. And some of these, guys had spent $2,000, $3,000 on professional direction finding equipment. And here we were with a $10 radio and a $15 whip on the car, challenging these people and finding the transmitter. Not always finding it before them, but pretty much always finding it. And a few times finding it before everybody else. So, and I'll get into how we were able to do that. Because, we obviously didn't have $1,000 or more worth of equipment. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. So, there's a lot of tricks with this. And with the 2-meter hunt, your transmitter is very directional. When you get into hunting on HF, things are quite a bit different. The hunts are usually done differently. There are national competitions for this. You can look this stuff up. People do 80-meter hunts, and there's equipment you can buy for direction finding on those bands. We've done a few 10-meter hunts, which kind of mimics the experience of the 11-meter or CB hunter. But it's a completely different experience and a completely different way of doing things because the radio waves travel differently. That initial bearing that you get on a 10-meter hunt may not be correct. So there's a lot of tricks, and sometimes the person hiding the transmitter can also play tricks and make things extremely difficult. And I'll cover a couple of the funnier ones that we've experienced. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. And we're going to talk about this because whether or not this hunt happens on New Year's Day or not, we do intend on having some mobile transmitter hunts. They can be a lot of fun, but there are definitely some safety rules and recommendations to keep everybody safe. And we'll go over that as well. So we cover a bunch of these points, but right now I'm going to take some check-ins. So to check into the net tonight, I want you to give me your call sign, your name, and your location. Please come in now.
Control. Here is Steve, call sign K2GOG, located in Poughkeepsie, directly across the river from you. Good evening. Net control. Here is Matt, KB2GGS, in Kerhonkson. Net control. This is WA2RKN, Jerry, Hyde Park. Net control. KD2 Tango Victor Sierra Blue, West Brunswick, New Jersey.
What is that?
This is KB2RWW, Bob, Alabama.
No, thanks, Bob. wasn't sure where that carrier was. I should have realized it might have been you trying to get in. All right, thank you. Let me drop and see if there's anybody else.
Enter you like your ball. That works.
All right. Well, that's 8, including me. Well, we already heard from Jim. Jim doesn't have a lot of experience with this. Jim, I don't know if you want to add any technical stuff to it real quick or not, but we can go around and ask everybody what their experience is with direction finding, what they're interested in, if they're interested in it, any other additions to the conversation. But we'll start with Jim. And what would you like to see with an event like this, or do you have anything to offer technically?
Well, totally new topic to me. I've heard about it, never really done it in the past. So I think I'm going to sit back and see where it goes and see what comes to mind as things start to progress. K2BHM.
All right, that's fine. I'm just making some notes here, things I need to mention. Next up is Steve. And Steve, who is also a Long Island refugee like I am, used to participate in some of the same hunts that I did, but I believe he was a part of it before I got involved. But he knows a lot of these same guys. So, Steve, your thoughts on this style of radio direction finding?
Well, good evening, Neil. Good evening, everybody on the net. Good evening, Bob, operating remotely, I'm guessing. So good evening, everybody. Yes, I go a ways back with various types of radio direction finding. My start, much like Neil, came in the form of CD, and that was where I got my first taste of it. Let's just say there were some people that were creating scenarios that were unfavorable, and you only had 40 channels, and so you could not really ditch them too easily. So some of the older folks than I at the time did have vehicles, and the trick that they used on CB was to drive around in a circle in a large parking lot, because Long Island's relatively flat, and they would cant their antenna, which was on the back of their trunk. They drive around in the circle and watch the signal meter, and they'd go clockwise and counterclockwise, and they'd get a couple bearings, and then they move to another part of the parking lot, and then they'd have a direction to travel in. And it was amazing how quick people can find others. So that was my first experience. Let me let it drop. And let's see. Yeah, there were a lot of people that got found. I won't say as to what happened after they were found, but yeah, that was another lesson in diplomacy. That's all, broadly defined it. So that was my first foray into it, and then got into ham, and also learned that there were annoying people on 2-meter bands, and so I became involved with a particular club down there, part of its junior technical committee, and that meant going to find some of these annoying scenarios, which is one of the reasons what led into the creation of LITHARC, Long Island Transmitter something or other. I forget the acronym, but that's what we came up with. I'll let Neil fill in the blanks. And outside of all that, was doing REF work when I was active with Civil Air Patrol, and that was fun. So VHF, but different spectrum. And obviously, everyone around here, for the most part, knows that I've been running the on-foot hunts. I would love to get us into something mobile. Of course, it has to be done safely and organized in a particular way, because things are a little different these days compared to, let's say, the late 90s, driving around with cars and doing weird stuff. So safety and security is important. What I would like to see, me maybe would be a UHF hunt, and maybe not necessarily finding a transmitter on the ham bands. There's a lot, well, technically, there's other transmitters that you might find advantageous to find that are actually borrowing some of our spectrum. And those are fun, although probably not going to pick them up all too far, but it's a fun skill. So anyway, dropping a bunch of stuff out there. And Neil, just quickly, I have some information on the times for the slow scan passes for the space station tomorrow morning. So if you would entertain that, they can give the times, and it's a nice, easy time for people to actually be awake for, which would be nice. So anyway, back to you, and sorry it took up so much time. Back to you, Neil.
Well, thanks, Steve. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. Yes, I'd love to have those times and passes. Any information you have on that?
All right, thank you. So, the interesting thing for those not aware, December 26th through December 31st, the International Space Station will be sending slow scan images using the higher resolution PD-120 mode, which takes about 2 minutes per image. The time of the year is interesting. Where we are in North America, most of these, unfortunately, are extremely early hours in the morning, but some of them actually line up where most normal people are awake. So I'll give the times for tomorrow, and we'll just kind of park it there. The times I'm going to offer are going to be approximate, plus or minus a minute or two at start of pass, given some of us are in different areas around here, but generally the times are pretty much approximate. What I'll share are the times that would be where the start of the pass should coincide. So typically a pass is going to take about 10 to 12 minutes. You might not hear it for that entire 10 to 12 minute time, but that being said, you should hear something, and if you're able and equipped, then you can decode one of the images. So the frequency of note here, that being the most important, 145.800 is the frequency. And then I'll share 3 times. Let me just let it drop. All right, so the first pass of what I'm going to call normal human hours. There's a bunch of them earlier than this, and you can do some research if you're interested. But the first time I'll give all these in local time versus UTC, which is what most satellite and DXers prefer. So local time is easier. So 6:27 tomorrow morning. That's going to be a relatively low elevation pass. It's going to start out about 10 degrees above the horizon and peak out at about 16, and then it'll disappear again. That pass is going to be relatively short, probably about 5 minutes or so. So unless you're really looking for a reason to be up that early, find some other reasons. But if you have good, decent antenna or a Yagi or a handheld or whatever, you can use that. But the next pass is going to be a little bit better. At 8:04 a.m. is where it will reach acquisition signal, 10 degrees, and then peak out at 23 and a half or so degrees above the horizon, and then set at 10, so that's 8:04. And then we have 9:41, which is going to be 10 degrees above the horizon, and most importantly, it's going to rise to 74 degrees above the horizon. So this is going to be a good pass. It'll be about 9 minutes, but it'll be nice and high in the sky, and you should at least be able to download one image. So 9:41 is the next pass, and that's it for the normal human hours. So again, to review, the first one 9:41, the one earlier than that 8:04, and the one earlier than that 6:27. If you have questions, Neil, I'll send it back to you.
I'm just curious. Is there one before 6:27?
Yes, there will be a 4:49, which will degrees above horizon. There's a 312. I feel like I'm reading off train times. That one will actually be really good. 312 peaking out at 318. It'll get up to about 50 degrees elevation. I'm not sharing azimuth because everyone should ideally be looking at a compass, but how people interpret, if I said it's going to start, let's say the 312 path, if it's going to start at 216 degrees azimuth and end at 63.7 degrees azimuth, that's a little too much information, but generally the signal is super, super strong, and you'll be able to figure it out from there. So 312, 449, 627, 804, and 941. Those are the start times. Back to that.
All right, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'm in the city tomorrow, so the only one the 449 or earlier would be the only ones I'm going to get, unless I want to go up to the roof of my building and do it, which I'm not even sure I can do that, but that would be an interesting thing to do sometime. All right, I thank you. And I know that if people are interested in finding out when passes are for other days, I'm sure that there are resources available online that would allow you to do that. So, cool. Thank you. And as far as the RDF part of it, I will cover a couple of things here real quick. So yes, CB hunting. One of my secrets for the VHF hunts is my wife. Jill had quite a bit of experience in CB direction finding. And also knowing the area that you're hunting in really helps. So we make a really good team because she would drive and I would monitor the radios and play with the different attenuators and signal strength things. And between the two of us, we would almost always find what we were looking for. Part of making this work is getting that initial bearing. But I want to mention one thing that Steve did talk about was practical direction finding, direction finding for practical use. One of the things, when you're trying to find somebody who might be causing interference, whether it's with a ham radio repeater or even causing interference with a commercial or municipal radio service, which there are people out there who do this for a living. One thing you have to remember is that some of these people don't want to be found, and you're not the police. And one of the Long Island hunters was once detained by somebody that he attempted to approach. Let me drop. I don't recommend this. If you're looking for somebody or a group of people that are causing interference, you make notes, you take pictures, you take recordings, audio recordings, you notate the time and the location. If you have a GPS, you include a picture of that, in your pictures. But get as much information collected as you can. Do not approach the people you are looking for. That can be very dangerous and can be a little scary, as someone I know found out. So definitely not a good idea, but there's all sorts of things you can do, but it's a good idea when you're doing that kind of practical transmitter hunting that you want to remain stealthy and incognito. So, but that leads to part of the safety discussion. Transmitter hunting for fun can sometimes be misunderstood. So sometimes groups that do this will set certain rules. Only hide the transmitter in publicly accessible areas, places that are legal for you to be both hiding in and walking around in at the time of day or night that you're doing this. Always disclose to people what you're doing. Explain it. It's a hobby, but it also serves practical usage during emergency situations, and that's what we're doing. We're practicing for those emergencies. If you do happen to run into the police and they don't understand what you're doing, or some other security organization, if a short explanation and a flash of your ham radio license, if you have it on you, doesn't really get you anywhere, it's a good idea to just discontinue and walk away. Just you try to be safe as far as the hunt itself and the areas you're hunting in. The general public doesn't understand what we do, and you're bound to get people asking you, and it's actually it's a way to draw people into the hobby. And we are IDing as W2NDG Neil in Highland on the Overlook Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. Standing in the middle of a Walmart parking lot with a big tape measure Yagi might draw some attention, and you can tell people what you're doing and talk about it like it's fun, because it is. That's why we do it. Anyway, that's just some basic safety there, and we'll get into actual safety during the hunt in a moment. But let's go on to our next check-in, which is Matt, KB2GGF. Matt, do you have any RDF experience?
Hi, Neil. Matt, KB2GGF here. No, I've never done any RF hunting, but I find it very interesting because I do like puzzles and I like figuring things out, and I like radio, so it's a radio puzzle. I think that's interesting. So I'm here to learn, and I am doing that, and please carry on. KB2GGF, back to net.
All right, thanks, Matt. And I'll get into real quick. There are stages of a mobile hunt. I'm going to split it up into 4 stages. First stage is the initial direction finding, which I'll talk about in a moment. Second stage is the rough locating of the transmitter. So you're trying to narrow it down to a general area of your hunt area, a quadrant, someplace where you feel, within maybe a half-mile radius or so, that the transmitter is in that general area. The third stage is getting as close to the transmitter with your car as you can. And there are little tricks you play to make this work. And then once you know that you're in the vicinity of the transmitter, then the fourth stage is on foot, finding the transmitter. There are some hunts where you only have the 3 stages because whoever hid is actually sitting there in their car transmitting, and you just have to, acknowledge that you found them, and then go from there. So not all of them have that on foot stage. The on foot stage is different than the transmitter hunting events that we've had at Ferncliff or any of the on foot ones, because the transmitter is usually still operating with full power, 2.5 to 5 watts. And you're using equipment to find it. Low power, most foot hunts are done at a much lower power. And it actually does make it easier to find a transmitter on foot when it's transmitting with less power. So there's some tricks we'll hit on that. But that's the basics. And the question would be, how do I get that initial bearing? What are some ways you can do that? I know Steve talked about, the antenna hanging off the back of, like a truck or SUV. That doesn't always work, though. You have to have the right kind of antenna and the right kind of vehicle. So we'll talk about that next when I drop. But let's go check in with Jerry, WA2RKN. Jerry, any mobile transmitter finding experience or anything to add to the conversation here?
No experience to offer this week on this topic. My first hands-on experience was with the infamous KD2 VAH, and we all know how well that went. So hello to the community, and Lou, I see you're back with us again this week. I'm going to be sitting this one out and seeing what the experts say. WA2RKN, back to that.
All right, Jerry, that's fine. Thanks. And we'll see if we can get you out there at some point. So I mentioned initial bearing, stage 1. And there are 2 ways that I've done this. And remember, I'm not using anything sophisticated like a Doppler or Kerberos SDR, which is another Doppler-like instrument that you can use. So before I had the Yagi antenna, the way Jill and I would do this is we would, the night before, or if we had enough time before the hunt, we would analyze the hunt area. Now, like I said, they always gave you, a general radius that you were dealing with. Let me try. What I would look for is a flat area or a generally raised area where you had good view in all directions, that there was a building in that I could drive 360 degrees around or close to it. It did not need to be a really tall building, but that helped if it was a couple of stories high at least. But I would look for, what I could find, the closest thing to something that would block a signal that I could drive around. And as soon as the transmitter started, we would find ourselves in this parking lot or wherever this was that we decided to get our initial bearing and drive in a circle around the obstacle, usually like an office building or something to that effect, and make note of where the signal was strongest and where it was weakest, and note that on a map. I usually printed out a map of the radius and would make marks strongest and weakest, and that would pretty much give us our initial bearing. And it usually worked quite well. You have interesting problems in some areas that you hunt with reflections. And sometimes if our initial bearing led us or seemed to be leading us in the wrong direction, what would happen would be we would have to go to a second location and take another bearing, and then kind of between the two results try to figure out what direction we needed to go in. So, but that's initial bearing without any kind of special antenna. A couple of years into this, a few years into it, I made a tape measure Yagi. Really easy project. There's plenty of information on YouTube and all over the net about how to do these. They're really easy. And so now what I usually do is I look in that same hunt area for an unobstructed view, usually the highest point in that that hunt area, that radius. And I go there, and as soon as the transmitter is on, I try to get the direction of the transmitter. Now, sometimes you'll get two directions, because even though the Yagi is supposed to give you more signal front than back, it doesn't always do that. Sometimes if you're receiving the signal strong at the point that you pick to do your initial bearing in, sometimes it's hard to determine front or back, but usually you can. If you can't, then you pick a second location and then do that same front to back and connect the lines that you draw from those two locations, and that'll help you figure out whether you were correct in your guessing of front to back the first time. But basically, I use the compass on my phone. I get my initial bearing, I look at the compass, and then I draw a line on the map showing what direction I want to drive in. Roughly, of course, you're not going to, drive over barricades and lawns, and you have to try to stick to roads as closely as you can. So, but that's the initial bearing, or stage one. That's what gets you driving in one particular direction. All right, let's check in with Lou. Lou from West Milford, welcome. And any experience with this or any questions you want to ask about it?
Good evening, Neil, and everyone else on the net tonight. It's a big topic. It always has interested me. I have not myself done any of these fox hunts or anything, so I am eagerly just sitting here and taking notes and looking forward to attending one soon, or when the weather gets a little warmer, and see what it's all about. But it's good that you're going through the whole process, Neil, about it, because I've heard so much about it, but I haven't actually taking notes. And thank you for picking that topic tonight, Neil. So back to you, KG2TVS.
W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday night Science and Technology Night. Well, thanks, Lou. And yeah, it's you're a bit of a stretch to come up, but that's an easy drive, as we know. It's a lot easier for you to get to us than to get to Long Island. So maybe we'll see you for one of these hunts. But we can also do them elsewhere, where they don't have to be right at home either. So get some of the other clubs involved. There was one mobile hunt done since I moved upstate. It was kind of a Mount Beacon QSY Society joint event, and it was fun. And the guy who was running it was playing some interesting tricks to make it difficult to find. But Jill and I came in second place on that one, second to the West Point team, and it worked out really well. So, all right. Once you have that initial bearing, you're onto that course finding part of the driving, or stage 2, sometimes I'll call it. Basically, you know roughly what direction you need to drive in, and this is where navigation, Google Maps, or whatever you use. This is where that is going to come in really handy, because you want to try to stick to the general bearing you need to be driving in, and keeping an eye on your radio. And this is where some of our first safety tips come in. Let me drop. Always hunt in pairs. You don't want to be driving and trying to figure this stuff out at the same time. Really not a good idea. In fact, I think what we were talking about is for our mobile hunts, really not letting people hunt solo. It can be very dangerous, and I really don't recommend it. But whoever's going to be taking the wheel also needs to understand that they can't keep looking over and staring at the map. Let the navigator do their work, and you can listen, and you can be observant on the road. If you see another hunter going in a particular direction, you can make a note of that and mention it. If you happen to see, when we're getting a really strong signal, that there's a park or something that would facilitate the hiding of a transmitter, mention it, But these are the things you're looking for on your map. So you're driving in a general direction, and you're thinking about the area. Are there parks? Are there public shopping areas? Are things like that? That's what you're looking for. You're looking for a place where somebody could hide a transmitter along that general direction that you've already figured out you need to go in. Let me try. If you're not using a Doppler, you're not getting a constant feedback of the direction. And we're talking about stationary transmitters. There are people who try to do moving hunts. I don't recommend that either. That's a completely different subject. But as you get closer to a transmitter, the signal will get stronger. And this is where, a mobile radio is where you're starting with this. There is a point where that signal will be full scale or close to it, and it'll be impossible at that point to determine signal strength. This is where you need to pull out the manual for your mobile rig and see if it does have RF gain or some sort of attenuation. I'll mention that most Icom rigs, if you have an Icom mobile, the squelch control has dual function. It is squelch through the first 50% of its movement, and from the 50% point to the top, it becomes an RF gain control. And that's what's really going to help you as you get closer to the transmitter, is that you can move that control all the way up, and the signal strength will go way down on your rig because you're cutting your sensitivity way back. Some rigs have adjustable attenuation. That Kenwood All Mode we used to hunt with when I had it had an actual RF gain control separate from everything. But somehow you need to be able to limit the reception of that radio, or you could be a mile from this transmitter, and direction finding at that point is going to get useless. But there's other things you can do. part of our license to operate ham radio equipment includes guidelines for the legalities of the transmissions. And one of the things is that I mean by that is spectral purity, or in the case of what we're talking about, harmonics. Transmitters put out signals on harmonics, or multiples of the frequency that you're transmitting on. They do this. That harmonic needs to be below a certain amount of dB. So if you're putting out a signal at a specific wattage, the second, third, fourth, and so on harmonics of that signal need to be a certain number of dB less than your primary signal. So that's why we really don't think about this. Is, a transmitter that's operating correctly isn't putting out a lot of junk, and normally you're not listening for it anyway. But it's still there, and a 5-watt transmitter within a very tight radius can be received on a couple of its harmonics. Oddly enough, for reasons that I think I looked up once, but I don't remember, and I won't get into the technical reasoning for it, the third harmonic of a 2-meter transmission is easier to pick up than the second harmonic. And then there's another reason why the third harmonic is easier to deal with. It's because anybody with a dual band radio, that third harmonic falls usually within the 440 range. The second harmonic is going to fall into a range that most of regular 2-meter 440 dual band radios will not be able to pick up. But if you have something like these nice Kenwood, Yaesu, or Icom Ics that have wideband receive, you can program the second harmonic into your radio as well. But we don't really need the second harmonic until much later on. That's stage 4. During stage 2, you can switch to that third harmonic periodically and see if you're getting anything on it. I'd say, realistically, you need to be within eyesight of the transmitter to get something on its third harmonic. When I say eyesight, I'm talking like 1/10 of a mile or closer. And depending on conditions, that's going to vary. It really is. But having that frequency already programmed in so you can flip to it quickly is going to do you a lot of good. Having a second radio with another antenna and something programmed onto that third harmonic, just waiting for a signal, is another way to do it. What I usually do is I run an HT in the car, up by the dashboard, under the windshield, someplace where it's going to get a clear shot at a window. And I'll actually put it on the transmitter frequency, because that radio is going to have much less sensitivity than my mobile rig with the outside antenna. When I start hearing a signal on it, I'll switch it over to the third harmonic, and then wait for it to come alive as you get closer to the transmitter. But that's a trick. And as long as you start playing with your signal strength with an RF gain control or the harmonics, you'll notice that the transmitter will get stronger and then it'll get weaker. You want to mark on your map where it was strongest. Once you have that point, that crossover where the transmitter got strong and then started getting weak again. And remember, we're pretty much attenuated or RF gained out at this point, so we can actually determine this. Once you have that point, then try to drive 90 degrees to it. Try to drive across it. And once again, make that note. Where was it strongest? Where was it weakest? And then you can try to crisscross. As depending on the roads available, you do your best with that. And you will eventually, looking at your map and trying to figure out what's around here. Where could the transmitter be hidden legally? You'll have a pretty good idea where it is at that point. And that's stage 3 that we're into at this point. When the third harmonic starts coming alive, that's stage 3. And you'll pretty much know where the transmitter is, but you might still have to get out of the car to find it. So let's, I don't know. Bob said he was waiting for an order to come in. I'm not sure what that is. I asked him if it was pizza, but I haven't heard back from him. So But let's see if Bob is there. Bob is coming in to us remote from Alabama.
Just in time, caught the beeper. Yes, good evening, Neil, and to everybody else on the net. I do have quite a bit of mobile directional finding under my belt. I have done over the years. I started off using an HT and a simple 5-element Yagi antenna and a 30 dB attenuator, and have done direction finding that way, usually going to 3 to 6 different points and taking readings in certain bearings and stuff, and then marking that information on a DeLorme topo map. And then by the time I get done with my third or fourth reading, I have enough lines marked on the map to pinpoint an area where I can get closer to and start using the attenuator to find things. Let me drop. From there, I upgraded to using Doppler for doing the microwave stuff, and had limited success finding stuff going that way. And then the latest one I had posted, there was a crowd-funded SDR receiver, it's basically 5 receivers built into one card, and they called it the Kraken RF. And their practical application is using it for just that, finding transmitters as you're driving it around, and as you're driving around, it will finally plot where everything, where it thinks it is, and then start to give you directions to go to that point. So that will be kind of interesting. And that, not terribly expensive. I got onto it while the funding was still available. It is still being funded. It's just a hair over $200. It's kind of cheating, but when you get older, sometimes walking around just isn't good anymore. Let me drop again. Sorry for the little bit of a lag here. We're doing remote and watching the video and talking at the same time puts a strain on the network, but we're doing okay. Other than that, besides doing that, I have also done war driving, going around looking for wireless internet signals. That's another whole neat and interesting ball game that isn't. It's fun in some ways and not so fun in others. And yeah, when you're driving around in a truck with a 5-element beam hanging off the back, a lot of people tend to stop and ask you what you're doing. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the net. QB2RWW.
All right, Bob, thanks. Great stuff. And yeah, I've looked at the Kraken and its predecessor, the Kerberos SDR. Really neat stuff. A lot of the evolution of that product is going to be the software, and how it computes things. I know early on, Kerberos SDR pretty much just gave you a heat map. The first software they were using with it, where you would drive around the area where you thought things were, and it would kind of guide you a little bit, but when you were done, it would give you a heat map and show you where it thought the transmitter was. But really cool stuff, and the professionals that do this for a living, who are trying to find something that's interfering with commercial or municipal radio. Sometimes it's not malicious. Sometimes people interfere with things by accident. And there's some really good stories about stuff like that from the people who do this professionally. But they're using very sophisticated equipment like this. And it's cool. I hope, at some point maybe to get involved and go a little beyond the basics here. But for now, I enjoy the challenge of hunting without all the crazy stuff. And it's just another thing I have to wrap my head around that I don't have time for right now. So, and we've covered stage 2 and stage 3. Stage 3, you pretty much know where you've landed. You know the transmitter is in a particular location that you can see from the car, and you're going to need to get out of the car. This is W2NDG on the Overlook Mountain Sunday night Science and Technology Net. It's at this point that the hunt becomes a lot like the hunts that OMARC has already had, but in many cases, the transmitter is operating with more power than you're used to. We've discussed the different ways of attenuating things. There are kits you can buy or pre-built attenuators that you can put onto one of those Yagi antennas, and they allow you to get closer to the transmitter without it overloading your radio to where you really can't check signal strength. I didn't have anything like that for quite a long time. And what I used to do was I had a couple of different antennas for my Icom radio, and the Icom has a switchable single-step attenuator, which helps. But I would also have the channels programmed in for the second and third harmonic. For direction finding, if you don't have a direction finding antenna, you can do something called a body fade. Let me drop. When things are really attenuated out, which you can do by switching in an attenuator, putting a really crappy antenna on your radio, or in some cases, taking the antenna off completely, and it might still be receiving. You hold the radio about midpoint on your body, right about stomach level, below your rib cage, and bring it tight in and turn around slowly. And there will be, you'll have nulls. There'll be a spot where the signal is stronger and a spot where the signal is weaker. It's usually easier to find the weak spot. And when you find the weakest point in the signal using the body fade method, the transmitter is to your back. And that's another little method you can use for finding stuff. It's at this point that playing with the third and second harmonic really comes in handy, though. Like I said, the third harmonic, you have to be pretty close to pick it up, and you can play with the attenuator on that as well. The second harmonic, if you pick this thing up on the second harmonic, you are pretty much standing on the transmitter in most cases. It's got to be that close for the second harmonic to come alive. That's in my experience anyway. Let me drop. Some of these attenuators work by off-tuning your radio a little bit, and you can do this manually. Set your tuning steps in VFO mode to the lowest they'll go, and then slowly tune off of the frequency as it's getting stronger. And sometimes you can do that. Some of the most accomplished hunters that I've hunted with on Long Island just use that. They don't have any fancy equipment. Another issue here is the quality of the HT. Without getting into the whole Baofeng argument, I own a couple of them myself. They do work. And we're not going to talk about anything beyond that. But a Baofeng or other, similar cheap Chinese-made HT is not good for this type of transmitter hunting, unless you have something like one of those add-on attenuators. And even in that case, it's not great because these radios don't really have a usable S meter. It's really hard to read signal strength out of them. You're working by ear at this point. I really recommend, a good HT from one of the, we'll say, the big 3.5, as I call them, which is Icom, Yaesu, Kenwood, and the half being Alinco. Those radios usually have functional S meters. They have much better front ends. They don't overload as quickly. They're going to be better for this type of work. And you can pick up used, Yaesu VX5s, VX6s, which will get you that broadband function where you can actually pick up the second harmonic, because A bow thing is not going to do it. You're not going to be able to pick up that frequency. Let me drop. This is W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. We've covered quite a bit of the stuff here. We have one person left from our first round of check-ins, Paul, who said he was at work. Any comments on anything, Paul? Have you done any of this stuff? Well, since Paul's at work, he may not be able to respond to us, but we'll give him another shout later. I've covered most of what I wanted to cover with a couple of things. I have to explain what a Doppler is really quick, and I wanted to talk about the transmitters themselves. But first, let's see if there's anybody else out there that wants to talk tonight. Is there anybody else who wants to check into the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net? Please come now with your call sign, your name, and your location. All right, nothing heard. So let me wrap up this portion of it. And I wanted to mention a Doppler, and without getting into a long scientific explanation, the word Doppler, Doppler shift, can be applied to the most simple thing we can think of is, when you hear a train coming and the train whistle seems to change pitch. That's an example of the Doppler effect. It has to do with waves being compressed at the observer's location when something is moving towards you and being stretched when it's moving away from you. Doppler shift is also how they figure out a lot of things in astronomy, because things change color. Colors shift slightly depending on where they are in the galaxy and how the relative speed between the Earth and an observed object would be. But Doppler can also mess with radio waves. And when you're dealing with direction finding, if you have an array of multiple antennas, the signal you're listening to is actually going to arrive at those antennas at a very, very slightly different time. And by rotating the receiving on those antennas, usually using a microprocessor and pin diodes, a microprocessor can then figure out the time difference between the receiving on that array of antennas and say, well, this antenna received the signal first. And let's say it's a 4 antenna array, and the antenna immediately to its right received it almost as fast, and the antenna to its left not quite as fast as the one to the right. So it's going to estimate a bearing, which would be slightly to the right or slightly towards that antenna that picked it up next. It's going to compute this, and some of them have 4 antennas, some of them have 6, some of them have 8. They work best when you're moving. So sometimes it's hard to get an accurate bearing unless you're moving. And they can be quite accurate. If you look in the back of QST magazine, there's a guy in number 2 land. He's actually... Yeah. My own radio beeped there like I had timed out, but I don't think I did. Did I time out? Well, I guess not. So, there are, lots of different levels of Doppler equipment, but you definitely want to be moving to get an accurate bearing. And there are cases where Dopplers don't work very well, but most of the time they're going to get some of these guys to the transmitter faster than somebody who isn't using one. The one I was mentioning, there's a guy on Long Island who sells a commercial Doppler product, which is pretty good. One of the ones that a lot of people always had over the years was the Ramsey model. It was a kit. It was mediocre. I have one somewhere actually that I really never used. It was given to me. It needs some servicing. It's got to be updated a bit. But it's, if you really get serious with this stuff and you want to get into it, it is something to look at. But this stuff that Bob RWW was talking about is more modern and using software-defined radio and some pretty sophisticated computer algorithms to try to figure out where the signals are coming from. It's similar to Doppler theory, but using a lot more computational power behind it. Let me drop. Another thing here to talk about is the transmitter itself. What is it? Do you want to get involved in, making one, hiding transmitters, having your own that you can do this? So some people just sit in their car and transmit. And normally, the way a transmitter is done in a transmitter hunt is that it's 30 seconds transmitting, 30 seconds silent. That's usually how it's done. You can do different variations on that, but that's most of the hunts I've been on. That's what's usually done. It's not hard to make one. If you have access to a radio, you can do some basic wiring and soldering possibly. I made one myself. I used a simple Arduino board, and I used a Baofeng UV3, which is an older, lower power, tiny Baofeng radio. And one of the advantages of using that radio is that you can run it on 5 volts. So I was able to run the Arduino and the radio on one of these cell phone emergency batteries. And because the whole package was pretty small, I was able to package in a very small pouch. So it made it not as obvious. And then just use like a Slim Jim antenna or something external to it. It works well. And I found the code for the Arduino, which is called a sketch. I found someone who had already written one and put it in the public domain, and I altered it to my needs. And what mine does is it plays a tune, just a single, monotone, not monotone, but just a single tone tune, kind of a crazy version of Music Box Dancer. And I had to program that by figuring out the relative hertz values for each of the notes. And then after it plays the tune, it taps out hidden transmitter, please find me W2NDG, something to that effect. And then it signs off for 30 seconds, and then it starts all over again. You have to figure out how to get the Arduino board to trigger transmit. Easiest way to do it is to set your radio in Vox and just make the first tone slightly longer. What I did is I had like an activation tone before it plays the tune. So it would come on with a long tone just to get the transmitter going and then play the tune. But there's other ways to do it. There's definitely ways you can trigger push to talk either through a relay or something similar. But you can make your own transmitter. The UV3 based one that I have puts out about 2.5 watts. The one my friend Andy has puts out about 5 watts. His was built in an old ammo can, one of those rectangular ammo cans. Probably not the best thing to be hiding in a public park these days, but he has like a big cartoon sticker of a rabbit on the side and some other decaling on it that, shows that it's not a bomb. But I've always told him he needs to put it in something else. So, but that's usually the one that they're using. It's got a rubber ducky antenna on the outside and a lead acid battery inside. His is remote activated, which is kind of cool. So you can hide it and then turn it on from somewhere else with DTMF or touch tones from your HT. This is W2NDG on the Overlook Mountain Sunday Night Science and Technology Net, talking about mobile transmitter hunting, and currently on the subject of the transmitters themselves. I'll give two quick funny stories as to how sometimes this can go wrong. One was one of the hiders who attempted to fool us. He took Andy's transmitter box, and like I said, there's a rubber ducky on the outside, but it had like a BNC mount on the outside of the can. This guy, who was our hider, we couldn't find the transmitter. This was one of the most difficult hunts I've ever been on. Nobody seemed to be able to narrow it down to one location. It seemed to be in multiple locations. What Lou, the hider, had done was he had hidden in Farmingdale, towards the middle of the village, and he had a very tight VHF multi-element Yagi antenna and a camera tripod. And he mounted the Yagi on the tripod, hooked it up to the bunny box, and he aimed the Yagi antenna at the Farmingdale water tower. And the signal bounced off of that thing in whatever directions it wanted to go in. That was very ingenious, but very frustrating. That one was tough. There was another night that, and here's a pro Doppler story. Jill and I were hunting, and as we got closer to where we thought the transmitter was, it seemed that every road we took during the stage 2 part of the hunt, every road we took seemed to be taking us away from the transmitter. Everywhere we drove, the transmitter would start strong and then it would get weaker. And it was crazy because it didn't seem to be where we were starting from, because it wasn't really strong enough yet. And as it turned out, after however many minutes and minutes and minutes went by of futility, they had to give us a hint because they figured out why we couldn't find it. The battery in Andy's transmitter was going bad. So every time it shut off for its 30 seconds, we all know how, lead acid batteries have a certain amount of recovery when they're not being used. It would come on, and the box was transmitting a pretty low power because the battery was bad, so maybe about a watt and a half. But by the time it had done its 30-second transmission cycle, it was down to about a quarter to an eighth of a watt, 125 to 250 milliwatts. So every time this thing transmitted, it was reducing its power through the 30-second transmit. And the way that looked to us on our end was that we were always driving away from it. So in that case, the Doppler people were able to find it and we were not. There was another case where it was the exact opposite. It was a hunt around the Huntington, New York area on Long Island, with the center of the hunt being somewhere near the Walt Whitman Mall. I couldn't get a clear bearing, so we drove up to the highest point in the area, which is right next to the highest point on Long Island. West Hills is about 40 or 50 feet off of the highest point on Long Island, which is about 400 feet. So we were at about 360 feet, and we took our initial bearing from there. And we pretty much drove in a straight line along that bearing, and we were getting nothing. But we just kept going in that direction, and we finally got a signal, and we found the transmitter in a park. Why was it behaving like this? Because the guy who hid it had hid it in a large metal drum, one of those giant park trash cans. And the signal that was emanating from this thing was kind of mushroom shaped. So there was no signal anywhere near the transmitter until you were right on top of it. But as you got more altitude, the signal finally spread out enough that you could hear it. So from our high point at 360 feet above sea level, we got the signal. Nobody else thought to start up there. A couple of them went up there much later on. But the Dopplers weren't working because they had no signal to work with. So we found it first, and by about a 20-minute margin before anybody else showed up. Pretty interesting. But there's so many more stories like that, but those are the two best examples to show you, when my method of direction finding doesn't work and when it actually works better. So that's about as much as I wanted to cover with everything. Let me drop one more time. Let's do a quick check for anybody else who wants to check in or comment on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. Please come there.
I guess I'll comment, K2BHM.
Go ahead, Jim.
I've been reading the mail. Not a lot of experience here, but when you were first mentioning tracking down somebody who's maliciously interfering, question: are the commercial products available? Or are you relegated to homebrew this? Some sort of a Yankee mount that piggybacks on top of the dovetail slides on your OZ or AK-47. You're prepared when you find them. And I actually did do some fox hunting, now that you mention it. Our Wi-Fi here was being interfered with, and it didn't make any difference what channel I went on. I tried to avoid it and so forth. It was just everywhere. So I wound up getting one of those dongles that's a Wi-Fi spectrum analyzer. And let me drop a second. It was one of the projects that my buddy Ken, WB2TDG, and I got into a while back. He was the driver, and I rode shotgun with the sniffer, and we tracked out one of the neighbors that was interfering with the Wi-Fi. Turns out that Wi-Fi is not exclusive to Wi-Fi. There are 4 video channels up there for surveillance equipment for alarm systems. And this guy used to have an alarm company, and he had several cameras set up in his place. And he was stunned to see us coming around with a sniffer and finding all of his transmitters, transmitting his video. And if we had the proper equipment, we could have checked in and saw if he was home or not before we rounded the place. So they rapidly disappeared. And one more thing. You talk about the harmonics. Harmonics, as far as the FCC is concerned, I think the harmonics have to be 70 or 90 dB down from the fundamental frequency. But a lot of things generate harmonics, like switching supplies for the computers and motor speed controllers, light dimmers, all kinds of things like that where you switch things on and off. When you turn things on and off in a square wave fashion, mathematically, you typically generate a very rich plethora of odd harmonics. First, third, fifth, seventh, ninth, and they do decrease in intensity as they go up in frequency. And as you approach the 50% duty cycle, now you start to throw the evens in too. So there's a lot of mathematical precedents out there for harmonics. So, with that in mind, let me drop again. Well, I guess that was just in time. Years ago, they had mobile telephones in your car, and they were in high band. So you had a mobile transmitter receiver that were pretty close to each other in frequency. And they had little tuned cavities in there. And you had them tuned to the specific frequency for mobile transmitter, which were not 600 kc, but something significantly more. But if you were to take one of those transmit filters, twin cavities, and put it on your Foxon transmitter, you could significantly eliminate second, third, fourth order harmonics and remove that whole plethora of intelligence from the realm of possibilities in the hunt. So, anyhow, that's it from here. K2BHM.
All right, thanks, Jim. And yes, in the QXY Mount Beacon hunt, that's exactly what they did. The guy had a set of cans, and he was removing the harmonics from the signal. He was also using basically a base rig in the car and varying the power between 1 and 50 watts, depending on what point in the hunt we were. So the power was going all over the place, and there was no harmonic to track, but we still found it. It was it's a lot of fun, and it was good getting the initial bearing in that one because I chose that backside of the Galleria. When you're facing the front of the Galleria, that back left corner is the highest point there, and we parked there and got our initial bearing with the Aggie. So definitely cool stuff. And I know you were joking when you asked the question, kind of, but yes, there is definitely commercial transmitter hunting equipment, and sometimes this gets pretty serious. When I was on the island, let me drop. Towns are all pretty close together because of population density. You have a lot of schools, you have a lot of fire departments in the fire districts. There's a lot of them. And my oldest son is heavily involved in the Dix Hills district. He's a lieutenant on Dix Hills Fire. I think he keeps getting reelected every year. So he knows about a lot of this stuff, and he knows of this story that I heard from the guy who found the transmitter. The adjacent fire district there, which was, I think, Farmingdale. Trying to remember. It was the next one to the west, and there's a ham radio operator who happens to own a couple of repeaters in the area, who is also heavily involved in the fire department, and they had a guy on their main fire frequency who was coming on, and he was just yelling and chanting and saying all sorts of stupid fake terrorism things, we will say. Let me drop. So he got a hold of some professional transmitter hunting equipment from a guy that we know who does it professionally. And they found him, and he was arrested, and he was prosecuted. Yeah, don't mess with this stuff, folks. It's definitely not something you want to be caught doing. But you don't want to interfere with something important like that. But yeah, there is professional equipment, and the one guy I know who does it for a living tells the best stories. So, but that's all the information I can offer on it, unless anybody has any questions or comments. So let's take questions and comments from the list. I don't think we're going to go back through the entire list again because, like I said, I think I want to shut down a little early tonight. It's been a busy weekend for everybody. But any questions, comments, or late check-ins? All right. I think what I may do here, given the time, is at some point I'll review this video and create a presentation that we can put up to accompany it, covering all these different things. There's certainly a lot to absorb here, but when we talk about mobile transmitter hunting, a lot of people immediately assume, well, I'd have to buy a Doppler, or I have to get this or that. Trust me, you can have a lot of fun with this with almost no investment. Once again, the only drawback here to transmitter hunting on a shoestring is that Baofangs and other inexpensive handhelds are not good for this usually, but with the right add-ons to it, you can actually use one of those. But I just strongly recommend getting something that has a good signal strength meter. Sometimes even a good handheld scanner is enough. Some of those have that type of readout on them. There's some broadband receivers out there. If you watch on eBay or some of the secondhand ham one-ad lists, Icom has made a line of receiving radios. Also, Alinco has some broadband receiving radios. And then there's companies like AOR and a few others that you can pick up, a used Icom, R1, R2. There's a whole line of them. Or one of the Alinco DJ models. There's certainly plenty of stuff out there if you want a good receiver for the foot portion of this, and for that in the car extra little, warning for you getting close. And that's basically what I do. What do I have for handhelds? I'll make some recommendations. Probably one of my favorite HTs, which is no longer made, can be had used usually for a couple $100, is the Kenwood TH-F6A. It is the forerunner to the D74 model, which I think Steve has one. It's not a digital radio like the D74, but it is a true dual VFO radio, and it has wideband receive. It picks up from the bottom of the long wave band all the way up through, I think, a gigahertz. But what's cool about the TH-F6A as compared to its Icom and Yaesu competitors is that it will decode sideband. So if you like to listen, if you're still a shortwave listener, you want to listen to what's going on the HF bands, and you're traveling and you don't have a lot of room to pack a ton of equipment, this one little HT with a AC adapter and a spare battery or two will pick up everything. Maybe a little, wire antenna to string up for listening to HF, but it picks up AM and FM radio. You can use it as a scanner. It picks up pretty much everything. A great little radio, the TH-F6A. I also hunt with an Icom IC T90A, which is another wideband receive radio. It's very similar in function to that Kenwood model, but it doesn't have sideband ability. But the T90A has a really good receiver in it, and also for that, one radio in your suitcase type of radio, has really good audio. So if you want to use it as an FM and AM radio when you're out traveling, it does work well for that. One more drop. KB2RWW is also recommending the dongles, and he says cheap dongle. Well, the RTL SDR USB dongles that can be used as SDR receivers. I have the one from rtlsdr.com. That's the one I usually recommend to people. But what he's talking about is you can use these on your phone if you have an Android phone or cheap Android tablet. You can, there's a licensed driver, it's only a few bucks, and software that you can run on your phone, and you can walk around with a SDR receiver. Definitely another thing you can do, and then get kind of visual with your receiving, and you also have the ability to do the RF gain and attenuation and everything right on the receiver. So that's another way to do it. I've done this with a laptop in the car with an SDR radio. There's all sorts of things you can do like that if you want to play with SDR a little bit, but that's probably a topic for another night. I think I'm going to be doing a Tuesday night presentation night on SDR at some point in the future. So let me do one more drop here. I think we're going to wrap things up. This has been W2NDG on the Sunday night Overlook Mountains Science and Technology Net with K2BHN, my co-host. We meet here every Sunday night at 8 p.m. to talk about science and technology, not always things ham radio related, but tonight it was. Please join us for the other nets that occur on this frequency. Every morning at 8:35 a.m., a rotating cast of OMARC hosts the 8:35 on the 8:05. Started at the beginning of the pandemic to keep us social and keep us connected. A lot of us needed this. There were things that we needed. We needed support. We needed to know who had what in the stores. There was a lot of reasons for the net when it started, and we've kept it going just to be friendly, and it's a great morning net. It goes well with your coffee, as Dave says. Every night at 6:30 is the 6:30 p.m. OMARC check-in net. Similar net, not done roundtable style like the morning net, but a directed net, still casual, also hosted by a rotating cast of OMARCians. Every Monday at 8 p.m. is the Ulster and Northern Duchess Readiness Net, or UnderNet. UnderNet has been put in place to get us ready for emergencies, to practice, to make sure that we understand and our members understand what it means to be ready, to have your equipment in a place, to have battery power, to understand the different ways of communicating during an emergency. This is in preparation for association with one of the emergency organizations attached to amateur radio. We have not attached ourselves to one yet, but we do intend to. Every Thursday at 8 p.m., our president, Dave, K2JLV, hosts the Thursday night Technology Net, or TechNet, and that is more of a ham radio related TechNet where people log in with troubleshooting problems, ham radio questions, technical questions, sometimes computer related, and then we spend the net going through that. If a subject does not come up in the first round of check-ins, Dave spins the topic wheel and comes up with one for us. Always a fun net. And we have one more new net on Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. Paul, ACTUQ, has started the 80-meter Hudson Valley net, and that's Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. on 3835 kilohertz, I believe, or close to it if it's occupied. This is new, having an 80-meter net, HF net, and I know Paul's hosted the first couple, and I believe we're going to start rotating those hosts. But please stop by if you have HF equipment. Check in Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. on 3835 kilohertz. Once again, I am Neil, W2NDG from Highland, New York, and this is the repeater run by the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club. You do not need to be a member to participate in any of the nets that I've mentioned, including this one. However, if you're not a member and you're listening, we would love to encourage you to check us out. You can find information about our club and how to join at omarcclub.org. That's omarcclub.org. This has been the Overlook Mountain Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. We now return the repeater to its regular use. As usual, I will sit here for about 5 minutes, but I'm going to end the YouTube stream now. Everybody have a good night, happy holidays, and Happy New Year.